Thank you. Ufology has so long looked at just the concept that these must be sentient beings, and I would say, who knows what sentient beings are going to look like on this planet in, say, 100 years.
Right.
And you need to broaden your mind.
Right. I would be very highly doubtful in 100 years, in 1,000 years. I think the whole idea, Philip K. Dick was onto this ahead of his time, separating the living from the non-living. It's going to be futile in a very short amount of time. And if we are indeed being visited
in our way, the separating the living from the non-living was already thought about, thousands of years ago. It's part of the basis of some religions.
Right.
But we're thinking of it in a technological way.
Technological, right. But, what is you can look at the human body and, what is it? But you can reduce it to a machine. You can, there's evidence that it's perhaps more than the sum of its parts, but nevertheless. And you look at machines, they're becoming more like living systems. And I would be very surprised if we are dealing with extraterrestrials, if that's one of the applicable
in the way we think of it, coming from another planet, living being.
I would be surprised if it's flesh and blood aliens in tin can spaceships, even if they are, gravity defying. I would expect something along the lines of self-replicating probes and a machine intelligence, something that arrives.
That's funny because abductees sometimes describe it that way.
Yeah, I know. You get these really interesting accounts, and it's another thing about nanotechnology. We always hear like Eric Drexler talking about. You built a spaceship in a vat. It's grown basically by microscopic machines, and there are no rivets. And you look at accounts of people who are taken inside, or report to have been taken inside flying saucers, for lack of a better term, and they describe seamless, sourceless lighting, very rounded contours.
Right.
And that's all very suggestive to me of molecular nanotechnology in action.
Yeah, but where would it come from?
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. So that would imply that we're not making these things.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, where would it come from? Well, from another planet or another dimension, probably. And I think most people now agree, I would think, that there is probably, and I mean scientists, not your average guy on the street, that there is probably life on other planets in our universe, and at least, and probably in our galaxy, and maybe even in our interstellar neighborhood, or intrastellar neighborhood, galactic neighborhood, as Stan would say.
Yeah.
And so, what are we looking at? We send little robots up to Mars. We haven't sent people. The first thing we sent out are robots. So maybe, and they're much more advanced than us, maybe they would send out robots.
Yeah, but we're still thinking of it in a travel from here to there in a certain amount of time kind of thing.
Sure.
And when you're saying these things, go ahead.
If they're warping space or using some of these other technologies that are well beyond us, but
still involves doing something to something that sounds mechanical that we can perceptualize.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably what it
might
involve.
be beyond that.
Well, maybe it is.
Because I talked to, who Dean Radin is? He's a parapsychologist. He wrote a book called The Conscious Universe.
Yeah, I do know him.
Yeah, he sat down with me one time during an interview, and I was going to interview him for like an hour or two at this place. By the end of the conversation, this was at lunch. We sat down at 11. We were talking, and then we were sitting there talking, and I noticed when I looked up and realized what was going on, they were saying, "Could you please move? We're serving dinner." And I recorded this whole conversation. And when I listened back to the conversation, I realized what he was trying to do was use language to get me out of the idea that time was, one, not necessarily linear, and two, not necessarily existed. So that the way he was saying that we can't get our minds around it because we're physical and we age and things seem to happen in the way we perceive things seems to happen in a sequence, cause and effect. Time flows from the future to the past. But at the end of it, I don't know how he did it, but he got me thinking in a way where there was no time anymore.
Right. This is really good.
How could that work possibly? I mean, it's like a 4D. I mean, the language is bad, but you can sort of grasp it. This thing where this stuff might be happening, but it might be happening all around us all the time. But only once in a while are we able to pull it into our kind of, be it by a plasma in the air or some kind of thing in our brains we don't know about, or being in a certain place at a certain time. Sorry.
You have a hot spot.
It's
kind of like a Wi-Fi, paranormal Wi-Fi hot spot.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of concept opens up a whole lot of doors, though, and they're very interesting doors. And one of those doors is religion, which is something that sends almost every ufologist screaming through another door.
Except Jacques Vallée.
Yeah, except Jacques Vallée.
And Barry Downing, for some reason.
Barry Downing's a good guy. Met him, interviewed him once. Bright guy, and has some interesting ideas. His book, The Bible and Flying Saucers, is, I think, a classic of ufological literature, whether you agree with it or not. But one of the fundamental concepts that underlies almost any religion, including the Christian religion, is that God is eternal, meaning he can transcend time. Time doesn't exist for God. There was a Canadian evangelist in the 18th century, Henry Allen, I studied when I was working on my MA in history, who referred to it as the eternal now. Yesterday, the Beatles called it Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, which was a wonderful album. And God can transcend time. Well, what if 10,000 years in the future, assuming we're still here, we learn how to transcend time, whether through mechanical means or whether we just create an understanding of the universe.
Yeah,
you're talking about that.
The way we're talking about it now, that exists now.
Yeah.
We're not talking about thousands of years in the future. We're talking about everything going on, every possibility going on right now, and always has been and always will be.
Well, are you talking about the many worlds interpretation?
No, I'm talking about just a singularity where everything is going on at all the time. And if you can get to the point where you can access that, then the time doesn't make any difference anymore.
Well, that's one way of looking at it for sure. The other way of looking at it is that at some point we'll discover that time, through whatever means, is nonlinear, and that we'll be able to manipulate, like Doctor Who or something like that. And we come back through time and we become our own God. And in a very real sense, we become the UFO knots and everything else.
That's funny. That's what Western magicians have been trying to do for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That's very Frank Tipler. His proposal in the physics of immortality was that supercomputers that harness the power of the big crunch at the end of the universe, assuming there is a big crunch.
Sounds like Douglas Adams.
Huge tower.
Hello.
Lots of ifs in this book, but his basic idea is that these supercomputers will be powerful enough to simulate everything that ever happened to such an accurate degree that it'll be indistinguishable from reality. And so in that sense it fulfills biblical prophecy of resurrecting the dead. And his book is very you want to strangle him sometimes reading this book because it's lots of supposition, and it got justly slammed. But nevertheless, some interesting ideas. If you could harness enough computational power, using maybe like a neutron star or something, I don't know, and used it to simulate something and make it so exact. And that's one thing I was talking about.
That's the basis of the Hindu religion, actually. A lot of that.
Some interesting parallels with Hinduism. One idea that's been kicked around for years, actually, but it's becoming more in vogue now that we're getting better and better with virtual reality and computers, and this becoming a bigger part of our life, is the idea that one possible solution to the Fermi paradox, and I use paradox in quotes because I don't think there is one, but the reason we haven't detected radio signals or seen megascale engineering in the night sky or whatever is because aliens upload themselves into a computer environment and basically become addicted to virtual environments where things are better than the real world. And we're heading in that direction right now. We're becoming more insulated.
We're already there.
Right, yeah.
We're
heading there. We're definitely heading there right now. And and in that case, the civilization's not going to have any interest in sending signals and searching because they might invent a much more interesting universe for themselves and perhaps not even know the difference.
Yeah.
And you could, of course, that opens up a philosophical can of worms because perhaps we're living in a regressive, constructed universe and ourselves.